Hello, everyone. I wanted to do a recording to talk about Diablo 2, 3, and 4. To properly share my thoughts on 4, I'm going to have to talk about 2 and 3. So let's get right to it. I'll start with Diablo 2. I've always thought Diablo 2 was the best of the series. It maintained the same simple play style, I guess you can say, and it was just overall fun. You didn't really have to worry about min-maxing or having the absolute best setup. Most builds within reason could handle the highest difficulties, which is a really great thing to see. I think that Diablo 3 kind of ruined that experience, and we'll get into that in a minute, but as far as Diablo 2 Remastered is concerned, I can only hope that they don't screw things up like they did with the Warcraft 3 Reforged. The only things that I would be willing to see with Diablo 2 Remastered is just the updates in the graphics and maybe a balancing to the skill system. I did think that there were some skills that weren't properly balanced or at least had proper leveling numbers. Some auras or skills only got maybe 1 or 2 points per level, and that was kind of weird. Because it's kind of like if you're spending a skill point, you should be getting more than 1 for that. But other than that, I think that if they just do the graphics, it's perfectly fine. But I hope there's not going to be any drastic changes beyond that. So that's really all I can say about Diablo 2 Remastered. Now let me get into Diablo 3, because this is going to tie into my discussion with 4. So Diablo 3, as I was mentioning earlier, in my opinion, ruined things because it wasn't so simple anymore, and the way that they handle things did really restrict the builds. As I mentioned prior, a lot of builds did work in the higher difficulties without too much trouble. But then 3 came along and completely changed that because of the resource system. The resource system, while I understand they were trying to do something new, it inadvertently or purposely, I don't know how you want to word that, did cause builds to become more restricted. And you will notice that the builds did share some similarities. So, for example, you'll notice with the Crusader, at one point, I forget how many seasons or which seasons it started, but there was that shotgun build using Heavenly Ray or whatever it was, and that lasted for quite a while. And then, of course, you had other builds too with the Crusader. And if you look at all the different builds, they share some similarities because, for the most part, depending which build it was, they did use accurate set or whatever because accurate set was the better way of handling the resource generation. So the resource generation did cause things like that, which is really unfortunate. Diablo 3 kind of felt like Path of Exile to me, or at least was starting to get that way, because in Path of Exile, they had a similar, how do you explain this, like complicated system in that you really had to like look at the numbers and calculate them to be min-maxed. Well, I understand people do, want challenges and things like that. I just don't think that it was in the spirit of Diablo. Diablo, as I said, was supposed to be a simple game. So between the resource generation and the fact that they made things a bit more complicated than they should have, I do feel like Diablo 3 was a complete waste of time. Others may disagree with me because, they say, oh, it did really well after the seasons, and, good for you, but it doesn't matter how much you disagree with me. I mean, at the end of the day, it's pretty easy to see that they went a completely different direction with Diablo 3 than they did 2. Not just for, adding the resource thing, but also, like I said, the build restrictions because of how few builds actually worked at the higher tormented difficulties. With Diablo 2, it was kind of like you could do almost any build and get away with it. To my memory, and maybe things have changed since, what was it, Path of Diablo or whatever that mod is. The Paladin itself had, I think, like 6 different viable builds that were considered close to min-max or at the min-max level. But if you look at Diablo 3, you're not going to see that much of numbers. It's really sad to see. I do also think that they restricted things even further on that note with the whole you have to use this weapon type of thing. Because Crusader was really one-handed shield. Literally all of its skills and stuff was for shields and stuff. So that was really unfortunate because with the Paladin, in contrast, back in Diablo 2, you had the option to go two-handed or one weapon and shield. I mean, the choice was up to you and how you handled it. And there was different builds for that, like the Hammered In, and then, of course, there was also the Might Paladin. But anyways, I could continue ranting about Diablo 3. Let's go and get into Diablo 4. Let me go and switch tabs real quickly. Okay, so Diablo 4 appears to be bringing back the resource system, and that's an issue to me. I really don't think that they need to bring back the resource system. If people disagree with me, then here would be my compromise. I'll use the Paladin and Crusader as examples because I know those classes pretty well. I think that the way they should have handled it is make it so that resource generation was a flat number, and then maybe there's some sort of mechanic to increase the amount of generation. So in the case of the Paladin Crusader, I think that could have been increased resource generation around demons, undead, specters, and that kind of thing. I mean, that's the Paladin and Crusader in a nutshell, is to rid the world of evil. So you should be able to get increased resource generation from just being around evil. Because they're doing this mechanic system, though, that kind of complicates it. So I think that if they're going to do a mechanic based thing, which you can kind of see it right here, I think that they could do something where not every skill requires resource generation, but instead gets a bonus from it. For example, in the case of the Crusader and Paladin, I think that they can use their resource to amplify a skill. So if it's a skill that does, like, let's just say 200% damage against an enemy, then maybe you can say you can burn through your resource to do an additional 200% damage against demons, undeads, and specters. So I think that would have been an appropriate way of handling it, because then you're at least adding something new to the game, but you're not making it overly complicated, and you're not making the build dependent on an item or something. So yeah, that's what I have to say about Diablo 4 resource generation. If that's coming back, you really need to do a better job, Blizzard. But more so to this whole mechanic thing. Now, you can see that there's 2 mentioned here. The arsenal system is 1, and then you'll find the enchantment system down here for sorceress. I think this is perfectly fine, depending on whether or not they implement this well. But the whole idea of being able to assign a weapon to a particular skill for the barbarian is actually really cool to see, so that you're getting the most out of that skill. It's more of now an automated system for ensuring that you're doing the most. That's really cool. So, something like that's perfectly fine. The enchantment system is a little more complicated, though. And with that, I can see what they're trying to do. And that's really cool that you can mix mash things. I just hope that they don't do it too complicated. We'll see how it goes. Something like the arsenal system is fine because it's more simplistic, and it's actually helping the character in question. So I don't know what this is going to do quite yet, but based on what I can see, I'm very worried that it's going to get complicated. And if it does, then that's not in the spirit of Diablo. But let me switch over to another tab. Where is it? Yeah. So, and here's another thing that's kind of worrying me on the complicated end. You'll see that there's going to be some new stats. So, they're going to be the prerequisites for item affixes. They didn't say suffixes, but affixes. And depending on how they handle items, that could mean the 3 stats at the top or the 3 stats at the bottom of the weapon or armor in question. I can see what they're trying to do here, and that's that's kind of a cool system. But again, I'm worried that there's going to be complicated systems with this. See, the thing is, if you really want to create a complicated system, then you need to make a game specific to that. Like Path of Exile did. But Diablo is a very old game, and it brought players in for simplicity and just overall fun. But you're going to alienate, or at least ruin, the experience for a good portion of the Diablo player base because of the fact that you're now doing things that weren't part of the original. So, this is why I'm reinforcing this whole don't overcomplicate it. But we'll see where that goes. Here's the new skill tree. So you can see that it's going to be a little bit more different than the original Diablo, and we'll see how this goes. Right now there's not too much information on it, but just based on the images that we do have, I'm not seeing anything in here that will be complicated. So assuming that sticks, great, I'm okay with that. It's just a slight change in the graphics as far as I'm concerned. No big deal here. Let me see, where was it? Ancient. More unique. Okay, yeah, here it is. This is what I was looking for, the ancient items. So I'm not really sure what they're trying to word here. I think they're meaning unique items, but I can't be 100% positive. I've seen 3 articles referencing this whole ancient item thing, but it's not really clear to me. It could be I'm just not understanding it, or maybe I'm not reading it correctly, but I'm assuming that they mean unique items, which would be weird. Depending on how they handle it. It seems like to me that they want to make it so it's an affix, a suffix thing, rather than an item-based thing, which is fine, I guess. And here's why I'm thinking that'll be fine. It's because in a lot of games where there's unique or legendary items, the problem is a lot of the unique or legendary items that actually have effects that are really good in the game, they're very lower level weapons. So if you can take, a legendary or unique item affix or suffix and bring it to a newer weapon, then that makes sure that you can use it at the highest levels. Although you'd have to be very careful with the balancing and things like that. So that's kind of what I'm thinking with the whole thing. We'll see. Oh yeah, the inventory Tetris thing. Yeah, that shouldn't be a thing in any game, really. I mean, we're at a point where, you should be able to not have to deal with that. It seems like to me that in a lot of games, they get to a point of doing like all these new mechanics and other things, but the one thing that always lags behind is the inventory management, and I do find that disappointing. So we'll see if that does really well. But anyways, that's the most I can say on Diablo 4 on itself, but I want to talk about something sort of related to it. Okay, so I'm pulling up this wiki page, which is for Warhammer Vermintide 2. The reason I pulled it up is because Warhammer Vermintide 2 does something really interesting in comparison to the other games, in that it makes it so you can turn it into a community kind of thing. Warhammer Vermintide 2 has a Twitch integration system in which your chat can vote for a specific condition or for a monster to spawn. And I think that's a really cool system, and I'm honestly shocked that there isn't more of this in other games, because I think it's really cool. For Diablo 4, I don't know if they're going to keep like the whole Nephilim Rift thing, or like secret maps or things, but if they do, it would be really cool to have a Twitch integration where like the people can vote for I don't know, like a treasure map, or like a map that's like super difficult type of thing. I think that would be really cool to get like a Twitch integration involved, kind of like Warhammer Vermintide 2 does. Um, Kind of related to this, and I've done videos on this or recordings on this before, so I'm only going to do like a brief summary of it because I've already done recordings for it. But in the past, I've mentioned how Linux distributions such as Manjaro Plasma Edition have the ability to connect to Android phones through the KDE Connect software. I think it would be really cool if games going forward took advantage of that, because I'm sure that you could do more than a Twitch integration with that kind of communication. Because if a PC is able to communicate with an Android phone, I think you could do something really unique with this whole Twitch integration thing with video games. Something like Diablo would be perfect for this kind of integration due to the fact it's an overall simplistic game in terms of graphics and things. So something like this should work really well on Linux. The game itself, and then of course adding in the Twitch integration. I think it can be done, but the question is, will they? So I don't know. That's just kind of like my thoughts in a in summary in regards to each section. But I'm very interested to hear what you all think. If you have, I don't know, like any comments, questions, or something, just throw them up in the comment section. I will look at them and respond accordingly. Thanks for listening.